In the age of satellites and stem cells, religion may no longer guide our harvests or heal our wounds, but it still defines who we are. This is episode 9 of 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, Navigating the Now Where We Ask. In a world that needs unity, is religion part of the solution or part of the problem? Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a huge question, really diving into excerpts from Yuval Noah Harari's book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century,
Mm.
specifically chapter 8. He calls it, pretty provocatively, Religion, God Now Serves the Nation.
Yeah, that title definitely grabs you.
It does. And look, we know billions of people hold deep faith. Religious movements, well, they have a huge impact on global events, often
Yeah.
fueling conflict, right?
It's impossible to ignore. Religious identity, religious politics, they're woven into so much. But the mission for this deep dive, using the material you mentioned, is to really ask, how relevant are traditional religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, you name it, how relevant are they to the big problems we face now in the 21st century?
Right. Can they actually help us solve them?
Exactly. That's the core question Harari seems to be tackling here.
And the book suggests a really interesting way to approach this. It says we should look at religion's role by sorting problems into three different kinds of buckets:
Mm-hmm.
technical problems, policy problems, and identity problems. It's a framework that really helps, I think, clarify where religion might still have influence and where maybe less so.
It does. It helps move beyond just general feelings about faith and look at, concrete challenges.
Okay, so let's dive into that first category Harari lays out. Technical problems. Now, think about life before, say, the last couple of centuries.
Right. Pre-modern times.
If you had a really practical issue, making sure your crops grew, trying to get better if you were sick, religion wasn't just sort of relevant. It was often the main place, maybe the only place you turned.
Absolutely. For farming,
Right.
religious figures basically were the experts. They had calendars tied to festivals telling you when to plant. Temple rituals were supposed to bring rain or keep pests away. If a drought hit, you didn't call an agricultural scientist.
Sure.
You went to the priests
Right.
to just talk to the gods.
And medicine was completely tangled up with religion. Prophets, gurus, shamans, they were the healers. Harari mentions Jesus spent a lot of his time healing people.
That's a key part of the story, yeah.
You didn't check into a hospital. You might, I don't know, visit a witch doctor or go on a pilgrimage hoping for a miracle.
But fast forward to today. And wow, things look different. Harari calls it the victory of science.
Right.
If Egypt has a locust plague now, okay, maybe people pray, sure, but the government, they're calling chemists,
Yeah.
entomologists, geneticists. They want pesticides or like genetically resistant crops.
And if your kid gets measles, you're not heading to the temple first. You're rushing to the hospital. You trust the doctors, the vaccines.
Even mental illness, which,
Yeah.
for ages was explained by demons or possession.
Yeah, exorcisms and things.
Exactly. Now, it's increasingly seen through neurology, treated with drugs like Prozac. It's a huge shift.
What's really striking, Harari points out, is how our whole perception has changed. Like today, many people wouldn't even naturally connect religion with farming techniques or medical cures.
It's true. He mentions some people almost have this collective amnesia about religion ever claiming expertise in those technical areas. Like, religion? What's that got to do with growing wheat?
And this is where Harari makes a pretty blunt point, but I think an important one. He says the reason science took over these fields is, frankly, traditional religions weren't actually very good at farming or healthcare.
Oof. Yeah, that's his core argument. He says their real skill wasn't making it rain, but interpretation.
Ah, okay. Explain that.
Well, if the rain dance failed, the priest didn't say, maybe dancing doesn't cause rain. They'd come up with a reason. The gods are angry, your faith wasn't strong enough, you didn't do the ritual quite right.
Right. It protects the authority even when it doesn't work.
Exactly. Great for maintaining power, not so great for, actually getting results. Science, on the other hand, is built on admitting failure.
If an experiment fails, you change the theory, try something else.
Precisely. And that process leads to actual improvements people can see. Better crops, medicines that cure diseases.
And Harari argues even devout believers noticed this over time. When science just kept delivering better results in these practical, technical areas, well, religious authority in those specific domains just faded.
Makes sense. And he suggests this is partly why we're becoming a single global civilization, because what works technically tends to get adopted everywhere, regardless of local beliefs.
Okay, so for technical problems, Harari's verdict seems pretty clear. Science is largely in charge now. But let's move to that second category. Policy problems. These are way messier, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Not like fixing a crop failure where you know if it worked or not. Yeah. Policy is all about complex disagreements.
Yeah, like climate change. Huge scientific agreement it's happening, but massive arguments about what governments and economies should do about it.
Exactly. So does religion offer useful guidance here? Harari's answer is, again, mostly no.
He argues that, ancient scriptures, the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, they just weren't written for modern industrial economies or global finance. It's a different planet, basically.
Right. They don't have chapters on managing inflation or regulating cryptocurrency.
And yet, we see religious leaders heavily involved in policy debates. Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, influential religious groups in the US, Brazil.
Definitely. But Harari's point is subtle. When these leaders or their governments have to make actual economic decisions, trade deals, tax rates, whatever, where do the ideas come from? Not directly from scripture, he argues.
So where do they come from?
From modern economic thought. They or their advisors are drawing on Marx or Friedman or Hayek or Keynes or whatever the prevailing modern theories are.
Ah, I see. So the policy itself comes from secular, modern sources.
That's the argument. And then religious knowledge, scripture, tradition that gets used to justify the decision. To wrap it in familiar, authoritative language, Harari says, the garb matters little. The underlying policy engine is modern.
And he points to the evidence. Look at the actual economic policies. Shiite Iran, Sunni Saudi Arabia, Jewish Israel, Hindu India, Christian America. Are their fundamental economic systems wildly different because of religion?
Not really, he suggests. They're all participating in global capitalism, using similar bureaucratic structures, dealing with the same global markets.
There have been attempts, right? Religious thinkers trying to create totally different economic systems based on spiritual values.
Yeah, critiques of materialism and capitalism.
Hmm.
But Harari argues these attempts mostly ended up being superficial, like redoing the paintwork, adding religious symbols, maybe changing some social regulations, but not fundamentally altering the modern economic or state structure.
And this brings up that interpretation point again. If religious scholars are really good at interpreting texts,
then you can make almost any modern policy fit. Through creative interpretation, you can find ways to justify capitalism, socialism, whatever, using verses from the Bible or the Quran.
so the scripture isn't the source of the idea, it's the source of the authority to legitimize the idea.
That's exactly Harari's distinction. Marx or Hayek offer ways to understand modern economics. Scripture offers a way to claim divine approval for a policy arrived at through other means.
He uses Gandhi's vision for India as an example. Based on the Vedas, envisioning self-sufficient villages, the spinning wheel,
Yeah,
very spiritual, powerful symbol.
but ultimately not a workable blueprint for India's modern economy. It couldn't compete or function in the modern global system that way.
And it's interesting how we analyze things. Modern conflicts, like the Troubles in Northern Ireland, are often looked at partly through an economic lens, class conflict, etc. But you don't often see economic conflicts framed primarily as religious debates. Like Latin American guerrillas fighting over land reform weren't seen as mainly a theological dispute, even if the fighters were religious.
Good point. The underlying analysis tends to be secular, economic, political.
So applying this forward, Harari suggests that for big future policy questions like how we should regulate artificial intelligence,
We probably won't see distinct Muslim AI ethics versus Jewish AI ethics derived purely from ancient texts dictating specific regulations.
instead, people will likely divide along lines familiar from secular debates, pro-AI development, cautious regulation, etc., based on modern science and political philosophy.
And then different religious groups will likely use their traditions and interpretations to argue for the position they already hold, backing it up, giving it moral weight.
So religious groups do take policy stances, liberation theology, debates on environmentalism.
Of course. But Harari argues the driving force, the source of the actual policy ideas, usually comes from modern science, modern political movements, contemporary concerns. The religious element, he suggests, quoting Marx's idea, often acts more like a veneer.
Okay, but then Harari immediately says Marx was wrong to dismiss religion as just a veneer.
Right. He pushes back strongly there. Because while religion might be less relevant for finding technical solutions or specific policy prescriptions today,
It's incredibly relevant, maybe more relevant than ever, for that third category, identity problems.
this, Harari argues, is where religion's real power lies in the 21st century. He makes the case that large-scale human cooperation, the thing that makes our species dominant, depends on creating mass identities.
And these identities crucially aren't built on scientific facts or
Yep.
economic calculations. They're built on shared stories, shared myths, things Harari calls fictional stories, even if people believe them deeply.
And religion, he argues, is perhaps the most powerful tool ever invented for creating these shared stories and mass identities. Its main job today, defining us versus them.
Who belongs to our group? Who is outside it? Who do we trust, protect, maybe even sacrifice for? And who do we fear, fight, or ignore?
It's a stark contrast to the other areas. Like we said, Shiite Iran, Sunni Saudi Arabia, Jewish Israel. They might use similar technologies, similar economic models.
No Shiite physics or Jewish bureaucracy.
Exactly. But the people in those countries feel profoundly different from each other. Their sense of belonging, their identity is deeply tied to their religious affiliation. That difference is real in its consequences.
And religions create and maintain these identity boundaries through, well, through everything they do, right? Rituals, ceremonies, holidays, distinct ways of dressing, praying, eating.
All those things, shared practices, shared taboos, they draw lines in the sand.
And Harari acknowledges these traditions can be sources of immense beauty and community. Think of the sound of the muezzin's call to prayer, intricate Hindu pujas, the warmth of a family Sabbath meal, the sheer energy of a gospel choir.
Absolutely. They create powerful bonds, shared meaning, deep trust within the group.
But he's quick to add, there's often an ugly side too. Religiously justified misogyny, caste discrimination, persecution of heretics or non-believers.
The exclusion is part of the package of inclusion.
And whether it looks beautiful or ugly from the outside, the function is the same, uniting us by clearly marking us as different from them. Freud apparently called it the narcissism of small differences.
Yeah, focusing on minor distinctions. But Harari stresses, politically and historically, these differences are anything but minor. They can literally be matters of life and death.
He gives the example of LGBT rights. You have Israel with significant legal protections and social acceptance, relatively speaking.
Contrasted with nearby Iran or Saudi Arabia, where being gay can lead to imprisonment or even execution based on religious laws and identity norms. Those small differences have brutal consequences.
He uses Japan as this really fascinating historical case study. After the U.S. forced them open in 1853, Japan realized they had to modernize incredibly fast, adopt Western science, technology, capitalism.
Right, or risk being colonized.
But they were also absolutely determined not to lose their unique Japanese identity in the process.
So what did they do? Harari says they didn't ditch religion, they kind of turbocharged it. They took traditional Shinto, which was a mix of local nature beliefs, and the state basically engineered a new version, state Shinto.
Okay, what did that involve?
They blended Shinto with modern nationalism, ideas about Japanese racial uniqueness, bits of Buddhism and Confucianism, the samurai warrior code, and crucially, they put emperor worship right at the center. The emperor wasn't just a ruler, he was presented as a living god.
Sounds pretty archaic for a country trying to rapidly modernize.
You'd think, but Harari says it worked like magic. Japan transformed its economy and military at unbelievable speed while cultivating its incredibly intense, almost fanatical national loyalty and identity through state Shinto.
And the most extreme, chilling example of this fusion
Is the kamikaze pilot. Harari doesn't see them just as desperate soldiers. He frames them as the ultimate product of this blend. Cutting-edge technology, the airplane, combined with super effective religious indoctrination, state Shinto's emperor worship and national sacrifice, creating a human-guided missile.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
It is. And Harari argues that maybe less dramatically, many governments today still use traditional religions as, in his words, the handmaid of nationalism,
How so?
bolstering national identity by linking it to a specific religious tradition. He points to examples like the role of Orthodox Christianity in Putin's Russia, Catholicism in Poland, Shiite Islam in Iran, Wahhabism providing legitimacy in Saudi Arabia, the complex relationship between Judaism and national identity in Israel.
So religion gets reinterpreted and harnessed to serve the goals of the modern nation state, even as the religion itself is ancient.
That's the idea. It provides the stories, the rituals, the deep emotional connection that binds people to the nation.
He even mentions extreme cases like North Korea, which essentially created its own state religion, Juche.
Right, that bizarre mix of Marxism-Leninism, Korean folk traditions, intense racial purity ideas, the literal deification of the Kim dynasty, and even framing their nuclear program as some kind of sacred national duty. It shows how potent the combination of state power and manufactured belief can be.
So the takeaway for this identity part seems to be religion is hugely powerful here. Disputes over identity, fueled by religion, aren't going anywhere. They shape politics, influence how we use technology, and absolutely can ignite conflict.
Because that mass cooperation, that human power, ultimately relies on people believing in these shared identity stories, these fictions.
Okay, so let's circle back to the big question we started with. Religion problem or solution for the 21st century?
And pulling together Harari's arguments from this chapter. The picture isn't simple, but it leans pretty heavily towards problematic.
He seems to conclude that for the technical problems feeding people, curing diseases, traditional religions are now largely irrelevant. Science does it better.
Right. And for policy problems, managing economies, dealing with climate change, he argues they don't offer real solutions either. Their role is more about justification after the fact.
But for identity problems defining who we are, who they are, religion is extremely relevant, extremely powerful.
Yes, but Harari argues that in this area, it often is the problem, or at least a major part of it. By its very nature, creating strong ISIS identities often means creating division, suspicion, hostility towards them.
And this power to shape identity is often co-opted, becoming the handmaid of modern nationalism.
Exactly, which makes it much harder to achieve the kind of global cooperation we desperately need for truly global threats.
Threats like nuclear war, ecological collapse, the disruptive potential of AI and biotech, these don't respect national or religious borders.
But religious nationalism encourages people to focus inward. Iranians on Iran's destiny, Israelis on Israel's security, Russians on Russia's greatness, often framed as being a chosen people or having a unique mission. Global interests become secondary.
Harari does acknowledge that some religious figures preach universal values, love, compassion.
But he notes they generally lack real political clout on the global stage compared to the nationalist forces.
So the trap Harari describes is this. Technologically and economically, humankind is becoming a single, interconnected civilization. We face shared global problems that need global solutions.
Yet, politically and emotionally, we're still fractured, divided by nationalism, often reinforced by religious identity, into competing, sometimes hostile camps. He uses the European Union's ongoing struggles with integration, nationalism, immigration, as a prime example of this clash.
Yeah, trying to build a universal identity over deep-seated national and cultural ones is incredibly difficult.
It really is.
So it's a powerful and, yeah, kind of unsettling conclusion he draws. Religion remains this incredibly potent force, but mainly in shaping identities that divide us, precisely when our biggest challenges demand unity.
It definitely leaves you thinking about where we find common ground in such a divided world.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought, really stemming from this material. If Harari is right, and our deepest loyalties and conflicts often come from identities built on what he calls shared fictions, how can we possibly start to build cooperation around the truly shared realities? You know, the tangible threats like climate change, pandemics, AI, risks, things that demonstrably affect all of us, regardless of the stories we tell about ourselves. How do we bridge that gap? That's something to chew on.